And one of the things that he created is this thing called the bone structure. Um, Now, the bone structure is pretty simple, and I'll break it down for you into in a short while. Which basically it's a questionnaire that if you want to create a character, you just got to answer this questionnaire, and by the end of it, you'll know this character pretty well. But the bone structure is a really comprehensive way of examining your characters by particularly focusing on three dimensions, and this is physiology, sociology, and psychology. So the physiology is obviously the physical makeup of our characters, how they appear. The sociology is sort of how they were raised, the environment they live in, um, these sorts of societal influences on them. And lastly is psychology, which is a combination of the physiology and the sociology. And the way that Egri believes we understand characters completely is to analyze these three dimensions. And if you look at the quote at the top, it basically, this is something I quote a lot of people. It's a great way of really getting to grips with how this works. It's not enough to know what your character wants for breakfast. You must understand why they want it. And if you think about it, that's it sounds simple, but it's so true that you need to understand the motivation behind every action of your character to really get in their head. Um, I've got another quote from Egri, which I haven't included on the slides, but I think it sort of elaborates on this point. It is not enough in your study of a man to know if he is rude, polite, religious, atheistic, moral, degenerate. You must know why. We want to know why man is as he is, why his character is constantly changing, and why it must change, whether he wishes it to or not. Now we'll come on to change and character development shortly, but it's the first part, I suppose, is most relevant for us. And we need essentially, just because a character does what they do, it doesn't make, we need to understand why. So if we look at, like, there's a big crime, real crime buzz at the moment about um like serial killers and things like that, like, and the big draw is people wanting to know what makes these people tick, why did they do the things that they want to do. And that is definitely one of the reasons why I watch them, that sort of kind of genre. So let's get into this then. Let's have a look at the physiology. The slide will work. Here we go. So the physiology, our physical makeup, this is another quote from Uyghur, our physical makeup influences us endlessly, helping to make us tolerant, defiant, humble, or arrogant. It affects our mental development, serves as a basis for inferiority and superiority complexes. So it's Igri basically summarizes it very well there. How we appear. So our gender is a really good one at the moment, the Me Too movement. So it's becoming clearer and clearer how many injustices there are in the world. I mean, not that we already knew, it was just ridiculous how nothing's been done. And it still perpetuates, the problem still perpetuates. But so, like, in our society, gender plays a role in our physical sort of, in who we are essentially as characters, as we come on to see this in psychology later on. As does color of hair, like for people, certain hair colors can are affected by societal things, which then affect their psychology. And then we've got things like age, height and weight, posture, which is an often forgotten one in writing generally, particularly fantasy. We all assume everyone's straight shouldered, broad, straight back, broad shouldered. What about the sort of the people with the who slouch us all the time, or who've got a crooked back? Elaborating from that, we look at appearance. So is the character good looking? Are they over or underweight? Are they clean, neat, pleasant, untidy? What kind of body shape do they have? How big are the features, such as the nose? They've got big ears. Um, and this is a really interesting one. Defects, any sort of imperfections, deformities, birthmarks, so diseases. So birthmarks is one that I used in my novel Pariah's Lament. Izzy, the main protagonist, has a birthmark that covers most of her face, and as a result, she gets scorned by everyone in society, including their own mum and dad. And when we think about like sort of characters like this. So let's just take the Hunchback for example. So Izzy was a similar kind of character, but a Hunchback is going to essentially see the world in a completely different way to an Adonis, for example, because they're going to be treated so differently due to their physiology. But to further understand how our characters are, we need to have a look at the sociology. And this relates to how the likes of upbringing, beliefs, and interests shape a character and who they are. And when you think about it, it does play a massive part in who we are. Somebody who's born and raised in a slum is going to have a different set of reactions to someone who's born with a silver spoon in their mouth in a 16-bedroom mansion. But we can't always draw simple assumptions like that. It's easy to sort of pigeonhole people just because they were brought up somewhere. I mean, it's proven constantly. And for us to sort of go down them narrow paths is a way of making really flat characters, really cliche characters, and ones that we just, I don't know, get bored with. And these where other factors can be accounted for, such as a person's parentage. So, what kind of influence did their parents have on them? Were they quite distant? Were they quite absent? Or were they too loving, so they couldn't let go? Likewise, how with the relationship with the friends? Did they have any friends? How did that affect them? And it can trickle down to things like the books that people read, the TV shows they watch, um, or whether or not they're fashion conscious. These are the kind of things that, when we look at, we're looking to see how society has shaped this character. So there are different questions that we can ask ourselves to really get an insight into who this character is. And some of it doesn't apply to fantasy. So just dip in and out of the ones that apply. This is all I do. I understand that this can be more applicable to sort of real world genres like crime or romance, but it works for fantasy all the same. So first we've got the class. So the working class, the middle class, ruling class, occupation. That should be a second number there. I don't know why that isn't. But occupation, what kind of job do they have? Education. Did they go to school? Did they know how to read or write? So often in fantasy, characters come from peasant backgrounds, and most people didn't know how to read or write back then. Well, if it's a medieval fantasy setting, for example, which most of the time fantasy stories are. But these are the kind of things that you've got to think about. Did anyone go to university? What are the favorite subjects? Go with another layer. Don't just stop at what they studied. What level they studied at, but what did they study? What did they enjoy? What did they hate? How did they do? Are they intelligent? Did they do well in school? Or it's up to you. Then we look at home life. Are the parents still alive? Do they have quite a close relationship with the parents? Do they have any siblings? What's the relationship like with them? Are they single? Are they married? Are they in a relationship? Do they have any children? If so, who are the children? You just keep asking yourself questions as you gradually explore the life of this character that you weaving into being. Then you can consider things like religion and beliefs. Fantasy often has religions in it, or religious figures. How did your character fit in with that? Nationality is also a good one. Kingdoms, sort of loyalties to kingdoms and kings, queens, leaders, anything like that. What place in the community do they fit in? Are they quite a central figure, or are they more on the periphery? And what about political affiliations? If politics is a thing in your story, you don't have to always go with that. And what do they do in their spare time? What are their hobbies and interests? Everybody has hobbies and interests. So it's important that we give our characters hobbies and interests as well, because it's just naturally what people do. So if we want to create lifelike characters, we need to go into this detail. We need to give them life. And we might not use all this information, we probably won't. But the fact is, we can just draw on something that's just a little bit different, a little bit unique. But when we add that detail in, we can show that even secondary characters, if we do the same process with them, we can show that they've got their own lives. And not only does that help you create amazing characters, but especially if you're in a fantasy, writing in the fantasy genre, it helps you create lifelike and immersive worlds. Like, people are going about the daily business, they've got their own problems, as well as the story that your characters following, and the problems that they're experiencing. So we've done sociology. We've got the last one, which is psychology. Just wait for my notes to work. And self-explanatory, this is the mental state of our characters. And it is, according to Eagry, the combined influences of the first two dimensions, physiology and sociology. So, for instance, if we have a character called Bob, who possesses a pretty big nose, which is a physiological feature. If we combine Bob's big nose with him being teased and bullied endlessly by friends at school, which is a sociological factor, this may leave Bob feeling particularly sensitive when it comes to his nose, such that he grows angry or annoyed whenever it's mentioned. And this may lead to Bob getting into a lot of fights, breaking his nose quite often, which may make it look even worse. And this might ruin Bob's life, and he may become awash with feelings of hatred, despondency, resignation, and that can drive someone to extreme behaviors. And essentially, when we break this down, it's Bob's physical feature coupled with the society's reaction to that has created Bob's unique state of mind, in which he could either be terribly, terribly depressed, or he could end up hating everybody and then goes on a bitter rampage and kills them all. So that's just an example of how these different dimensions combine to create the psychological side. So when you are thinking about the questions that I'll come to next, it can help to think about the physical aspects of your characters, and then the societal ones, the sociological ones, and it becomes easier to then answer these questions relating to psychology. So the kind of things that we want to think about are the sex life, the moral standards. That's a big one. How they, a simple one. Some people kill spiders when they see them. Some people don't. Some people might rescue them, run away from them. These are different things that you can think about. What is their personal premise? What is their ambition? So personal premise, this just means what they want to achieve. What is their purpose in life? Do they have any frustrations or disappointments? So chief disappointments is always a good one to think about, because these are things that people find it hard to get over. And they in turn have a significant impact on who they are as individuals down the line. Temperament. So are they quick to anger, or are they quite chilled? This is a really important thing to understand, because people react to situations differently, and understanding what the temperament is like is a big part of getting to that stage. Similarly, what is their attitude toward life? It's quite similar to temperament. If you've got people who are quite chilled out, they might be quite easygoing. Which is like related to complexes, I suppose. If we look at the other side of the coin, if you've got someone who's quite uptight, they might have complexes like OCD, or other people might be quite superstitious, which is another big thing that I don't see get used in fantasy quite a lot. Superstitious characters. If you think about how superstitious we are, I have some weird superstitions. So I don't know why. Somebody told me that if you step on 3 grids that stand in a row, it's bad luck. So I don't know why. Ever since I was a kid, I've always avoided grids, and naturally, I still do that now, just because I'm in the habit of it. So is this person an extrovert, an introvert, or an ambivert? So that's quite an important thing. A lot of people identify with being introverted or extroverted. And if we have introverted characters, sometimes it can add more conflict to a story if we push them to do things that they wouldn't feel comfortable doing usually. So extroverted things, for example. And then we get to qualities. So are they quite imaginative? Have they got good judgment in things? Have they got good taste? This is all quite important in understanding our characters and their abilities. And what ties in with this is IQ, how intelligent they are. So in summary, different dimensions. Oh, sorry, before we get to the summary, I should say. Something that you may be thinking about is, what if one of these physiological or sociological or psychological factors have more sway over the other, which is totally possible. It does happen all the time. So, for example, if you've got someone, a young child, for example, growing up, if there is a lack of supervision and there is a presence of hunger because of poverty, for example, that's going to have a lasting impact on a character. So the sociological factors there have played a determining factor. I'm just thinking about the example of Bob, Big Nose Bob. It's probably going to be his physiological dimension, which has played the most significant part, because if we apply a simple but-for test, which is what I usually do because that's what I'm a lawyer. So but for Bob's big nose, would he have been bullied? No. If he had a normal nose, chances are Bob would not have been bullied. So again, in that instance, the physiological dimension has played a more significant role. So in summary, we get to the summary at last. The purpose of the bone structure is to understand the complexities of characters' thoughts, just like our own. And we'll finish with a quote from Iggy, since he kicked us all off. If we understand that these 3 dimensions can provide the reason for every phase of human conduct, it will be easy for us to write about any character and trace their motivation to its source. And by that, he means if we follow this process, if we do a pretty good job, then we'll know our characters inside out, and we'll know why exactly they do everything that we do. So for me, this has definitely been the best way of creating characters. I use it for every character, even secondary characters. If I want them to have more of a significant role than a couple of lines in the story, I will go to the effort of following this questionnaire. If that's all it is. It's quite easy, and yeah, see how you get on with it.